the first one, and to those of you that have reached out and talked with us in the interim. We greatly appreciate your knowledge. We're here to learn from you, and thank you for joining us again.
Okay, great. Thanks, Sarah. Okay, so today we're going to go through some introductions, and we're just going to keep it to the people who weren't on last week, and then we're going to look at needs assessment. That's basically the volume of waste that we can expect from damaged and end-of-life solar panels and batteries. Then we're going to look at policy options, how the business model and the value chain works, and then, as I said, we're going to set aside time to discuss some questions we have where we really want to get folks' input on what they think the policy should be, why they think it should be that way, pros and cons, preferences, all those types of things. But before we get to that, we'll start with introductions. And Sarah Simmons from Power Advisor, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks so much. So really pleased to be here today, presenting again to everybody. Just as a quick reminder, we do have a website, and the link is in the deck here, that provides both the deck as well as meeting notes and a recording of the meeting. We'll also, as materials are developed, be posting drafts and things like that as part of the consultation process on the website. We did a round of introductions last time, but I think it might make sense if anybody missed last meeting, maybe it's opportunity for them to introduce themselves to the group. I see one hand up, Ed.
Hi, everyone. I'm Ed Broen. I'm the Vice President of Policy Development for RWE Clean Energy. RWE Clean Energy is one of the largest developer, operator, and owners of clean energy assets across the country. My particular focus is in the area of the distributed space around community solar and other type-size projects, but also doing policy around end-of-life issues and circularity nationwide for RWE in my role as VP of Policy Development. So unfortunately, I missed the first call as I was out on PTO, but really happy to be here and happy to be part of the conversation here in Connecticut.
Great, thank you. Kyle.
Hello, I think I know most people here, but Kyle Wallace, I'm with Posigen, a residential solar provider, and looking forward to this. Thanks.
Hey.
Hi, good afternoon. Kay Lahu. I'm an environmental permitting and compliance specialist with United Illuminating.
Great. Thanks to the newcomers to the group. And if you need to catch up on anything, the materials are posted from the last session. This just provides an overview of who we have around the table participating in the sessions generally. And then in terms of our schedule, our last meeting really provided an introduction and objectives for the initiative. But as Andrew mentioned, today we're focusing on needs assessment and policy landscape, and we'll be soliciting feedback from the group with some pretty specific questions. We do plan on having these reoccurring in your calendar. So if you don't have it in your calendar, reach out to myself or Andrew Kinross and we'll make sure it's in your calendar. But we're planning sessions at the end of May, end of June, and mid-July, looking again at various issues. So for example, in May, looking at funding opportunities, and then in June, focusing on development of recommendations. And July, hopefully wrapping things up with finalization and presenting the report. So we're on track. We're feeling pretty good, but we have a number of sessions that we're planning for in the future as well. We're going to use a similar format for discussion purpose. So we are having a Slido. I'm going to put the Slido link in the chat as well, just so that you have it there if you don't get it right away. But really encouraging folks to submit, as they think of things throughout the presentation, submit some questions or comments, and happy to spend the time first on those issues that kind of filter up to the top as a priority through voting on the Slido tool. So following the presentation, we'll then have a discussion with the group, and then after the meeting, if there's anything that we haven't addressed, we can consider following up with any additional questions. But like last time, you can expect that we'll post the meeting notes and additional recordings on the website. So this is the Slido that we've got today. I'll put this information in the chat here so that you have it. One additional thing that I've done this time around was we do have some discussion questions at the end. So I've put that in a survey on the Slido. So you should be able to flip over from the Q&A piece to the survey question, and we'll keep the survey open after the webinar today as well. But if you can think of topics and you feel like you have opportunity today to submit comments on specific issues that we addressed today, please feel free to do that in the Slido today, but we'll keep that open after today's session as well for additional comments. I'll turn it over to Andrew.
Okay, thanks. So we're going to talk about needs assessment, and let's see, I think you went 2 ahead. Can you just go 1 up?
Sorry.
Oh.
Am I missing something?
Yeah, isn't the Connecticut one the first one?
Let me see if I got the right one up, Andrew. Sorry about that.
Huh. Oh gosh. Okay, how about this, Sarah? I am going, somehow that slide got deleted. So
oh, you know
let me
what? It was I know what happened here. Let me go ahead and share the PowerPoint.
Yeah, that'd be
'cause
great.
I think somehow this slide got hidden. Not slide. Okay, we're back.
Okay, so
Back
just
in
while,
action.
okay, great.
Here we go.
So in terms of needs assessment, really we want to understand what the volume of waste is going to be from end of life solar panels and batteries. And to understand that, you've got to look at what the installations have been that have gone into the field. And also some other estimates of average life of the equipment, and then also the weight per unit of equipment. So in terms of what we're showing on the next couple of slides are the installations of solar and battery, both in Connecticut and in the U.S. Nationwide. So here we've got installations in Connecticut for the past 11 years. The yellow bars are the solar and the blue are the batteries. So you can see that solar has been being installed for some period of time now. Now, what we're showing here is all solar installations, residential, commercial and industrial, utility scale. This is some information from Wood Mackenzie, and also some of these are estimates on our part, and in cooperation with the Green Bank as well. And these are
Andrew.
Yep.
The y-axis MW. What does that stand for?
Yes, that's megawatts DC.
Okay. Okay, so it's
the
not
number,
units; it's the total megawatts that were installed.
That's right.
Gotcha.
That's right.
Okay,
It's the
thank you.
megawatts installed. Sure. And this is both projects that are administered by Connecticut, administered by utilities, and projects that went in without, not part of a program. This is the whole market. You can see that there have been times across time when Connecticut programs have been launched, and that certainly has been a driver of this market, because as we all know, solar and storage is heavily dependent on policy. So we had the virtual net metering program that began in 2014, the community solar program that began in 2017, and then the 1 gigawatt by 2030 battery storage program in 2022, along with the the new versions of the residential and non-residential solar programs, the RRES and NRES, also in 2022. The battery market is a much more recent phenomenon, but with significant growth. So according to data we got from the Connecticut Green Bank, last year was about 50 megawatts. That's growing significantly, and it's also starting from quite a small base prior to 2023. But if you look at the queue, there's something like 7 gigawatts of storage projects in the queue. There's been an RFP for 450 megawatts of storage. So that's certainly a market that is growing. And then if you go to the next slide, Sarah. Then if we look on the national level, and we have a few more years of history here. So we've got 14 years of history. You can see that the market, way back in 2010, was at 1.2 gigawatts, and last year set a record, even though there were significant challenges in the marketplace, of 32 gigawatts. So we've seen a 27x increase over this 13-year period, which is a 29% compound annual growth rate, which is quite significant. Now, keep in mind the shape of these bars, because you'll see something a couple slides later that kind of resembles this shape. But yeah, that's on the solar side. On the battery side, the market was less than 100 megawatts per year until just a few years ago, and then we really saw the market begin to become quite large in 2020 when we went over the gigawatt number. Had 3 gigawatts installed in 2020, and the forecasts for this year are 14 gigawatts. So that's a 47% CAGR on a 4-year basis. So that's what it looks like on the national level. We want to look at both Connecticut and national, because when product needs to be recycled, it's probably going to be recycled nationally. It could even be recycled internationally, but we want to make sure that there's enough capacity so that when Connecticut comes out with a policy that that folks are able to access the recycling capacity. So those are the installations per year. And then Sarah, if we go to the next slide, we're determining what the waste stream looks like in metric tons per year. So beginning on the left, we're taking those actual and forecasted annual installations that I just showed you. And then in the middle, we make assumptions that convert the installations into metric tons of waste generated over time. The main two factors are the equipment life and the number of metric tons per panel or per battery. And so in terms of the equipment life, that's sort of the expected equipment life in years, maybe with a bell curve around it to show some product that's failing earlier and some later. There's also near term things that are happening. There's equipment that's broken during the manufacturing, the transportation to the site process, and the construction phase. And there's also, unfortunately, more and more weather events and other events that damage and destroy equipment. And someone on the call last month mentioned this large 350 megawatt solar farm in Texas that was very, very damaged by hail just a short time ago. The other trend that we're seeing and we're talking to people about is repowering. This has been a trend in the wind space, but based on the economics and based on whether there are improvements in cost and performance of equipment, that it might make sense to actually swap the panels out maybe at the end of the PPA, then that might also shorten the equipment life before the panels go to recycling. And then on the weight side, that's a function of the product mix. It's a function of the design of the equipment, the form factor of the equipment. You know, whether you're packing more power into a given space, those types of things. And then it yields metric tons of waste per year. And then Sarah, if you want to go to the next slide. So what we've done is we've provided a curve here. We've done our own modeling of this, but for the purpose of this call, we thought we'd provide a curve from a third party. In this case, the EPA from last year. Although some of the information that they've used was taken from even earlier than that. But let's not worry about sort of the decimal points here. The point of this slide is to give you an idea of what the shape of the curve will be in terms of annual waste volumes that we can expect in the US. We're also going to come up with this curve for Connecticut as well, so we know what the waste volume is going to look like for Connecticut. Some of the key assumptions here is that EPA looked at 3 scenarios. We took the middle one. So it's sort of, the one scenario was that, oh, the panels last for 30 years, we're good to go. The other scenario was that, there's sort of early loss of panels, and panels don't last as long as people think they might. So they might last, 5 years, 10 years, 15 years shorter than the panel life. They did use a 30-year panel life as an assumption. They used a Weibull distribution. So just think of that as a normal bell curve, where some panels are failing earlier, some panels are failing later. And just some rules of thumb that we took from this data is that 1 megawatt of solar panels is about 57 metric tons as of today, as of the assumptions that the EPA was using for today. And if we want to flip that around, that's 1 metric ton equals roughly 18 kilowatts. Just for comparison purposes, that's about 2 residential systems that go in today. So you can get an idea there. And then we took this number from 2025, so that's next year, and just applying these rules of thumb, we're expecting about 560 megawatts of waste, of solar panel end of life waste for calendar year 2025. Now, I would love to hear from people because we still are working on this research, but I would love to hear whether that sounds like an accurate number or not. As I said, we've spent a little bit of time looking at some of these factors, looking at the installations, coming up with our own model, but we decided to go with this model, which seemed reasonable to us. As you can see, 32,000 metric tons next year, 560 megawatts, but that is just at the beginning of the curve going up, right? So just as we've seen in the solar industry with installations, this is the second gold rush, if you will. This is the second wave of the solar industry, the recycling and these panels being recycled, and hopefully a circular economy with some products or components that will be used in new equipment. And I say solar panels, but I'm talking about solar panels and batteries. We're looking at solar panels on this page. So just wanted to kind of get this out there. We also are working on what the battery waste volume will look like, both in the US and Connecticut. We're not quite there yet, but we will be providing that information as well. So so this information is just as it relates to understanding, what the need is, what the volumes look like, so that we've got a sense of, how many solar panels how many batteries are going to be recycled on an annual basis. And now, Sarah, if you want to go to the, I guess, before we go to the next section, let me just open it up briefly. Any questions on the material that I just presented here, looking at these estimates of waste volume? Yep, Oscar?
Hi, Oscar Gompels here with Comstock Metals. So we've looked at this data quite extensively as well. And the 30-year panel life that we're seeing as a key assumption to all of these analyses and really all of these curves, we truly believe to be so far off. I was recently speaking with one of he's now the company is finished, but he was in the solar panel recycling business for 7 years and kind of got crippled by COVID. And he said to me point blank, it's like the average life that we were seeing is 17 years, right? And that really aligns with what we're seeing, at least in terms of the overwhelming demand initially, right? And we, notably in the Northeast area, I mean, we had an enormous quote for a New Jersey job, and those were 13-year-old panels. And the freeze-thaw cycle and the kind of harsher weather in the Northeast really contributes towards that. And then obviously you have like slightly harsher weather over the Sonoran and Mojave deserts too, in kind of the more southwest. And so, and when you delve into what is the assumptions in these, I mean, the regular loss, they're saying 30-year average panel lifetime, and then they essentially say after 40 years, it's a 99.99% probability that the panel's finished. Well, that's fine. But then when you actually look at the early loss scenario, the skew on that curve just seemingly doesn't make sense. So I'm saying the market data is more like 15 to 20 years of lifetime. But then in the early loss scenario input assumptions, it still says 30-year average panel lifetime, which doesn't make sense. And then the percentages across that distribution is actually, I know for the OSTI one, I don't know about the EPA one, but it's installation and transportation damages 0.5%. I would agree with that. Within first 2 years, 0.5%. After 10 years, 2%. And after 15 years, 4%. And then they don't really say their skew after that. But I'm arguing that, like, we believe the average is closer to somewhere between 15 and 20. You know, even if you're being generous, I would say between probably 16 to 25 years. And you can see how actually that curve and that the curve that you're showing right now looks dramatically different once you change those scenarios. And notwithstanding the fact that none of us have this data already, right? Like we haven't, the mass adoption, it hasn't been enough years to even have data. So we're running off like warranty assumptions or what the manufacturers are saying. And so, I mean, we believe there is orders of magnitude more coming out than this curve is saying. So yeah, that's just our thesis.
Okay. No, that's great. That's great input. And we talked to another party that was also saying the same kind of thing. I guess a couple of points, and then a question I have for you is that first of all, it's a small sample size, as you said, right? Like we really don't have, and this industry, like when it scaled up, it just went to high volume manufacturing very, very quickly, which sort of begs the question, like, were there any issues in terms of going from low volume to high volume in terms of life expectancy? But I guess my question is, like, in the financial models that investors have, they're assuming a life of 30 years, some even 35 years. So are you suggesting that the investors are in for returns that are going to be a lot lower than what they're anticipating?
Yeah, absolutely. And at the small scale, it pretty much wipes out everything they're expecting to get in return. And we see that, and we'll speak to some people, and they're just like, there's not even a chance we have. Like if they can't go to a solid waste landfill, which is the worst place for it, right? It's unlined, likely to leach heavy metals into that landfill, which then pollutes the drinking water of that surrounding community. Their only option to maintain the return that they were expecting is to go to a solid waste landfill for $50 a ton. And if they can't do that, then they kind of like, oh shit.
Yeah.
And we see it time and time again. Notably at the megawatt or sub megawatt sizing, because the economics just aren't there.
And how about, like, again, it's kind of a small distribution, a small sample size, but some of the big, the large megawatt recycling volumes, like you said one project that was 13 years old. Why was it being recycled? Was it a repowering? Was it a weather event?
It was a repowering. Yeah.
Okay.
Repowering, and then microcracking, primarily, we believe, caused by the freeze thaw cycle. Now, don't get me wrong, there may have been, with the ITC or some level of financial help, it incentivizes to do that maybe slightly earlier than you would have otherwise, but they were all going for recycling.
Okay. With the microcracking, was the OEM on the hook for for a warranty issue? I mean, I guess the warranty for these is 5 to 10 years on workmanship, but and then it's output after that. But I suppose 13 years it would be post warranty, so there wouldn't be any claim against the OEM.
Yeah, I'm not sure of the answer to that question, but I know that the OEM wasn't paying, so I guess they went on the hook.
Okay, no, this is great feedback, so appreciate that. There's a couple other questions, so let's see. I'm not sure who is number 2. Ed, go ahead, Ed.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Andrew, and everyone. And again, apologies, I missed the first call. I know Bob Nicholson from SEAL was on the first call, and he's really been spearheading the work that the Solar Energy Industry Association has been doing around recycling. And we've been having a lot of conversations around this. But, in the work that we're doing, I think it's really important that we keep the right context to what it is that we're talking about. Our view at RWE Clean Energy and another of other big developers, as well as the recycling community that SEA has been working with, is that we need to really act deliberately and at the speed that this situation demands, and recognize that we have a climate crisis that requires more solar, not a solar waste crisis that requires rapid regulation, and that policy should recognize that solar waste volumes are going to grow over time, but they're currently very low, and we can really act deliberately and think about what the right solutions are. And even the most aggressive of assumptions with regard to by 2050, the worst case scenario of PV module waste. There was an article in Nature Physics. I think the Union of Concerned Scientists were involved in it. They're saying by 2050, the worst case would be 160 million metric tons of solar. Compare that to 12,355 million metric tons of plastic waste, or 45,000 million metric tons of coal ash. So and again, I apologize. All of this may have been talked about on the first call, but I do think that it is important, irrespective. I have no idea if 1 megawatt of solar panels equals 57 metric tons. I hear the concerns with regard to assuming 30 years versus repowering and all those other points, but did just want to point out that, SEA has been doing work in this space, identifying different companies that are coming online, especially in the wake of the IRA. I think they have 12 certified, recyclers, and Bob has another 3 that he's looking at this month. And we're continuing to grow the recycling industry. Our very firm belief is that by the time that we see massive amounts of solar panels being taken offline each year, recycling will have already become at parity or lower than any kind of landfill type costs. But again, we have a climate crisis and we need to build more solar, not a waste crisis that requires regulation right at this moment in time, is our view.
Okay, great. Can I just ask one follow-up question? Is that, does SIA have, and I'm not sure if they're on the line or not, does SIA have, or does RWE have an opinion on what the average life ought to be?
Yeah, I wouldn't opine on that. I'd let smarter people than I answer the question. I do know that Valesa from SIA is on. Again, Bob has really been leading the charge, and he comes from a long background in recycling before joining SIA and taking over this work. So I don't really know the answer to that question. That could be homework that we could take away. But Valesa, I don't know if you have an opinion on that one.
I'll jump in really quickly and just introduce myself. Valesa Suter-Klein, SIA's Northeast Regional Director. I've done a lot of work on this in New York. I can pull it up. I need to double check. I think we were assuming about 25 years in New York. So I can double check that. But yes, definitely paying attention, and very interested in this. And apologies, I'm off camera today, but we'll be on in future meetings.
Okay, no worries. Thank you. Hank, go ahead.
Yes, thank you. I just have a quick question, and we may not have the information on this call, but maybe we just flag it for something to follow up on. Oscar got me thinking, and how much or to what extent does the insurance industry have sort of insights into not only panel life, like what are they covering, what are their coverages for, and also are there provisions within insurance for the projects or the equipment or wherever in the value stream to make sure that it doesn't end up in the landfill. So that, because that point about trying to make it work financially if you have to abandon the panel, and that the only way to sort of maintain that fiscal viability is for it to go to the cheapest landfill possible. We obviously don't want that happening, and so I'm just wondering if there's insurance protocols, provisions that are already in place to prevent that, or if it's something that we maybe want to look at and recommend as part of this. So I don't know if anybody has any answers or information on that. I'm happy to just put it to the side, but wanted to raise that.
Okay, great. So we've noted that. That's a good one. Yeah, because someone's gonna, like, if the average life is going to be, let's just say 15 to 20 versus 30. I mean, if someone's going to end up assuming that loss, and right now, I honestly don't know who it is. I don't know if it's the insurance company, the manufacturer, or the asset owner. So we have to sort of figure that out. But okay, let's
Gabrielle.
see. Yeah.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity. Just to piggyback on what Hank was saying, and Oscar, in basically everyone that's spoken before me. So at the end of life for these solar panels, the consideration is what type of waste it is. It's not just going to be solid waste, potentially. If there are hazardous constituents that are associated with the construction of the solar cell, either that will need to be dismantled and handled separately, or the entire thing cannot go to a solid waste landfill. And keep in mind that that would be an out-of-state solid waste landfill, not an in-state solid waste landfill. So if we're looking for capacity in Connecticut, it would need to be recycling capacity, not disposal capacity. And the other aspect of this is that EPA is currently evaluating the benefit or the concept of adding solar panels to the definition of universal waste. And universal waste is hazardous waste that can be managed through different mechanisms to reduce the hazards associated with that waste. And other things that are also universal waste are things like batteries, mixed batteries, electronic waste, used oil, those types of things are considered universal waste at this time. And so EPA is considering the addition of solar panels to that definition. which would mean it would still have more rigorous management requirements than a straight solid waste. So I just wanted to inform the conversation on that point.
Okay, great. Yeah, and we did in our jurisdictional scan last month, we did mention that information about EPA looking at categorizing that as universal waste. So, but no, that's helpful. Okay.
Mark is next.
Yeah, just a quick comment. I mean, I see solar panels. I mean, solar panels obviously are not my area of expertise. I'm more into the batteries, obviously, but solar panels that they kind of remind me a lot of lead acid batteries, which are, you know, probably one of the most single best examples of a recycled product on the planet, and mainly because the average consumer doesn't really handle the batteries. You know, usually you're taking that into your repair shop or to a Walmart or something like that, where someone else is doing that work. So the ability to get that product into the waste stream or the recycling stream, probably is a better way to say it, is good because the people that are managing the de-installation are going to be professionals that have the ability to gather these up and send them to the right people. So, and I know that we're seeing a lot of movement in the battery industry right now with some of the rare earth metals, where it's becoming not just economical to recycle the products, it's also becoming strategic, where you're dealing with some of the rare earth metals like neodymium and gallium, and you know, there's a whole bunch of them that are, even being a chemical engineer major, I barely even heard of some of these elements, but they're there, and they're worth something in the neighborhood of like $1 million per kilogram if you can get them. So it might make sense to maybe even have somebody, and maybe we already do, I apologize, but somebody who has a good knowledge of like how the solar panels are recycled now and what do they get out of them, and you know, what is the economic proposition now and possibly in the future.
Yeah, well, I mean, I can give you a high level of what we've heard is that there's sort of, they call it downcycling and upcycling. The downcycling is the low value recycling, which is
Right.
where they take the junction box off and the cables and they basically shred everything else. And it's used as roadbed material for roads, aggregate in roads.
Yep.
But then the upcycling is where they're getting into more sophisticated extraction and refining processes, and they are reclaiming the precious metals, the silver, the copper, you know, the glass and aluminum end up being burned in that scenario. That's their function in the recycling process. But if you can get the silver and copper and some of these other precious metals out of it, then that does take it from a cost center to a profit center. You know, right now the batteries are clearly a profit center. It's in the best interest of the OEMs to kind of, you know, take back their product and use them for recycling and remanufacturing. That's not the case with solar panels right now, but we're sort of making movement toward that upcycling scenario.
Gotcha. Thank you.
But it's certainly behind the battery industry by quite a lot. But there's just so much investment coming into the space that is attempting to, you know, take it from downcycling to upcycling. Who's next, Sarah?
We got Vanessa and then Gabrielle, and then I'm going to recommend that we continue with the slide.
Okay.
I'll keep my comments short. Valessa Suderklein with the Solar Energy Industries Association again. Just a couple notes here. One is that when we're looking at metric tons, it's important to keep in mind that, you know, glass and steel make up, you know, 75 to 80% of the panels by weight. So much of that recycling or much of that product is easily recycled. We know how to recycle it. The value is certainly a worthwhile discussion. And then I wanted to just simply draw attention to a note in the chat around the contents of panels and concerns about hazardous waste or not. Most panels and current panels are not considered hazardous waste, and they all go through a T-clip test. The ones that fail the T-clip test are those that have a little bit of lead in the solder from years and years ago. So there's context here that's very, very important when we talk about recycling panels that I want to make sure stays a part of the conversation. And I think it would be worth having Bob Nicholson give a presentation on, he's visited a lot of recyclers. And one of the main reasons we don't, almost all solar projects have decommissioning bonds. And one of the main reasons we don't see the recycling now is because there's not enough product to support a recycling facility. So this is all of Bob's work, is around finding the pipeline and connecting recyclers with end of life panels. So lots to discuss there that I think is worthwhile for this group. Thanks.
Thank you. And that would be great to have Bob give us a presentation. And, you know, I think you know, a sort of one takeaway from your comments is that this is a very dynamic industry, right? Like, so just a couple of years ago, hardly anyone was talking about this, and now, you know, we've got 30 of us on a call here, and this is happening in many jurisdictions around the country and around the world. So, and there has been significant, you know, progress made in the recycling space. So. One party that we talked to said, you know, they looked at recycling 2 years ago and, you know, they just didn't think that there was any good options for them. But, you know, even within the space of 2 years, that's changed now. Go ahead, Gabby.
Yeah, just a quick comment, and I'm another reason why I'm thankful it's virtual, is that what someone should maybe include in this discussion at some point is extended producer responsibility, in order to ensure that the highest best reuse or recycling of these materials is the path forward, as opposed to disposal, and looking at the least costly option for removal and disposal.
Okay, great. So on that note, yeah, Sarah was.
I was just going to say, Daniel, I think, has a question. We'll let him sneak through.
Oh, sure.
Yeah. Oh, his hand went down. Never mind.
I'll keep it.
Okay.
No, I'm still here. I'll keep it brief because I know you folks are trying to move on. I would piggybacking on a few different comments here overall. Redwood Materials, one of the leading battery recyclers here in North America. I've had a couple conversations with folks on this group already about Redwood's work in this space. Totally agree with Mark's comments in terms of the incentive for recycling in the battery space, particular to larger format batteries here and energy storage. And also, you know, to just the last comment on EPR, I think there's really some well-intentioned policy approaches here and an incentive for producers, but we also really do need to make sure the market is able to respond to larger format batteries appropriately. And there's a lot of good work happening. Redwood has been leading the way in some of this work. We just had a 2-year Stanford study life cycle analysis on our recycling process compared to traditional mining. I know this doesn't answer all the PV recycling questions, but would be happy to get into more details in terms of our battery recycling process and operation as it applies to this overall discussion in a future conversation.
Thank you.
Okay, let's dive in. Next page, Sarah. So, you know, just picking up on what Gabby was saying, I did want to recap from the last working group meeting. The two main regulatory frameworks that are used for recycling. The extended producer responsibility is one, EPR, and then the Advanced Fee Administration, AFA, is the other. You know, just quickly, the EPR is where the program requires the manufacturer or another party to manage the take back and recycling of PV modules or batteries. The costs are typically identified in the stewardship plan or profits. You know, these are, you know, OEMs are incentivized to do this, certainly for batteries and perhaps in the future with solar panels. The responsible party is typically the OEM. The timing of costs are, you know, when the services are needed. And two examples, one is Washington State. which has a PV stewardship and take back program. The OEM plans are due next year. So, you know, it's sort of a first of its kind. We haven't even seen the plans, certainly the, you know, much less the implementation. But at least it's legislation that has passed and is moving forward. And then more recently, New Jersey's Electric and Hybrid Vehicle Battery Management Act, which passed just 3 months ago in January, and the plans are likely due in 2027. So again, it's a future it's a future program, but it is the first of its kind in the U.S. We included here. It's not stationary batteries. They weren't included. But I think there's a lot of lessons learned, and you know, people we've spoken to have been pretty happy with sort of the terms and conditions of that legislation. So it could be something that we leverage in this study. And then on the advanced fee administration, that's where a state or another organization manages dedicated revenues, which can be funded through a variety of programs. Could be, you know, advanced recycling fees at the time of COD. It could be utility bills, bill fees. It could be taxes, and then the funds are dispersed when needed. Sort of, you know, 15 years down the road, 20 years down the road, whatever. Typically, the asset owner's the responsible party, and the costs are borne by the asset owners through a fee at the time of purchase. California's e-waste advanced fee administration is an example of this. This is proposed. It hasn't been passed yet, but there has been a lot of stakeholder engagement on that process. And then next slide, Sarah. I'll go over this one fairly quickly. We did, you know, there's a question about what is being done today. We took a look at decommissioning plans today, the ones we could get our hands on. The takeaway from this is that they're pretty high level. You know, they generally talk about the site has to be restored to, you know, the way it was before, non-hazardous condition. You've got to set aside a budget, add a contingency for that budget. And then specifically for solar panels, you know, we've just got some verbatim quotes of what are in decommissioning plans. And, you know, the modules should be recycled. It doesn't really give any specifics. They should be removed from the site via semi-trucks. You know, another one, the last one here, the owner or future owner operator will be responsible for logistics of collecting and recycling the PV modules and to minimize the potential for modules to be discarded in the municipal waste stream. So, you know, some specifics, but really not a lot of specifics. So we say, you know, no industry standard has really yet to emerge in Connecticut or the US. Correct me if I'm wrong on this. This is just based on the research that we've done, but we haven't necessarily spoken directly to too many people about this. But, you know, we understand that some companies, they might have a waste handler that, you know, takes broken equipment away from their warehouse. You know, others might just, you know, landfill the equipment at the moment. There's not really a lot of specifics, but as I said, it's a dynamic environment and things are changing. But just wanted to sort of establish that as sort of where we are today. And then Sarah, the next slide. Then we sort of have the business model, the value chain, if you will, going from left to right. What happens at the commercial online date, the COD date, when a project is commissioned, and then on the right, the end of life, what happens, COD, we have plus 10 to 30, you know, let's call that plus, you know, 0.1 to 40. As we know, these things can be recycled, you know, anytime over the next 40 years. And then in that end of life period, we look at the dismantling process and collecting and getting everything ready to be shipped out, the shipping, the recycling itself, and then the remanufacturing. And the activities here are, you know, what's specified in the decommissioning plan, whether it's, you know, whether you're going to use a recycler, whether there's going to be a decommissioning bond, Also, what happens to panels and batteries during the shipping and construction process, at that time of construction. Then moving to the right, the dismantling, the storing, the recycling, shipping to the recycling facility, that's obtaining the permits, doing the shipping, then the recycling and the remanufacturing. And we've got down below here typically who the responsible party is. And then Sarah, I'll go to the next one. We talk about the payment and revenue model. On the EPR side, typically it's the OEM that's involved. They're going to, put money aside in escrow or have a decommissioning bond, and then use those funds as is necessary, either to pay a third-party recycler, or in the case that the OEM self-performs, they'll self-perform. This will all be what's included in their stewardship plan. And then on the AFA side, that's where the asset owner would pay money upfront to a state agency or another organization that manages those funds, and then that organization would distribute those funds at the end of life. And then Sarah, next slide. And then these are some of the topics that we wanted to discuss with you. As it relates to these different parts of the value chain. So, early on in the process, at the very beginning, it was mentioned the T-clip test. Should that be required for solar panels? In terms of the collection, we've heard that for a very large utility scale plant, that's going to be handled by by a third party. They'll come in and collect all the panels and ship them to the recycling facility. But for residential and small commercial, where we're talking about, a small number of panels, a small number of batteries, what can we do? What should we think about in terms of collecting those batteries? Should a government agency organize, drop-off locations, or private organization organized drop-off locations? And then moving over to the shipping part of it, we've heard this is an important part. It takes economies of scale to make the economics work. In some cases, it can make or break the economics for a recycler if this isn't done efficiently enough. And we've also heard a comment about getting an exclusion from the product being a hazardous waste, and wanted to get your feedback on that. My understanding is that if you don't get this exclusion and you have to get this RCRA permit, then the permitting process is a lot longer, and just the time it takes to ship becomes quite a bit longer as well. I'll just wrap these things up and then we'll get to questions. But just in terms of recycling, we're interested in definitions around acceptable standards of recycling, interested in how facility audits should work, treatment of additional waste from recycling, penalties for non-performance with the policy. And then what we've heard on the remanufacture side is domestic content, and recyclers want to make sure, and manufacturers, OEMs, they want to make sure that they get credit for domestic content. So, how should Connecticut think about that? Overall, at the bottom here, we'd like to get your thoughts on EPR versus AFA, both for solar panels and batteries. Which is the best fit for Connecticut? And then we just have some other items here as it relates to EPR. What the options should be for EPR. Should it be a stewardship plan for an individual company, or should there be a PRO, that's a producer responsibility organization? And a couple of other items that we have here. So yeah, so that's what we had, just to sort of get some of these issues out on the table. I see a lot of hands up, so I think we should go to the discussion session, and we How about this? Sarah, if you go one more slide. We wanted to make it sort of a structured discussion, so kind of going topic by topic. But before we get to that, let's just have the questions for the people who have their hands up already, and then we'll get to this sort of structured discussion after that.
Great. So we got Stephen first.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yep.
Yep.
Okay. Hey, I just wanted to add one thing that I think is missing on the recycling is a lot of material ends up being repurposed as used. So I think that was left off. Particularly what's going to happen with EV batteries is they're going to just take the EV pack and they're going to use it to rebuild other EVs. We also see a lot with solar panels that the older panels are used to keep the other farms that have these older panels up and running. So you may want to add that to the equation because it's going to be a significant amount of material that's first going to go through a second life before it goes into remanufacturing.
Yeah,
So.
good point. And we'll be talking to Green Bank about that just to confirm. The focus we were taking was just on the recycling and remanufacturing part. But totally agree with you that the repurposing is another option here.
Right,
And
but I was just going to say that the repurposing people, because they're doing whatever they do with cars and stuff, they're going to also have defective material. So I would put them into part of the equation on how they handle it. Because they will, not everything will be working that they get, and they'll have to figure out what to do with it. Okay.
Okay, gotcha. Thank you.
One hand was up, but it went back down again. I don't know whether Valessa is still there. Yep. Go ahead, Valessa.
Yeah, mine actually gets at that first discussion question. There's a lot of really good stuff in this slide in particular. Thank you, Heather. But I just wanted, so SEIA has real concerns around the extended producer responsibility model. I did a lot of work in Niagara County in New York that essentially copied the Washington State proposal and went a little bit further. And the issue is just around, well, there's a lot, but around EPR works really, really well for like 3-year consumer electronics, things that are being retired really quickly, and you want the manufacturer to do a take back program. It doesn't make as much sense for something more like an appliance or a longer life product like a solar panel. We strongly favor a decommissioning model, and all the things that Andrew brought up are really interesting in sort of figuring out best practices around decommissioning with bonds that work, and how do you make that work where it's a financeable, known process that developers are already doing, and you can add that recycling layer in, and it works pretty well for developers. So I'm very interested in pursuing that conversation to the extent you all are interested. And I will just a shout out to the industry. Fossil fuels don't have decommissioning plans. It's a really big step. I'm absolutely committed to making this work. And I think it's really cool that the industry is having this conversation before we have a problem. So I'll leave it at that.
And thank you. And we will for sure get back in touch with you to follow up on some of those things because, yeah, I mean, we're as you can tell, we're still in collection mode. We're still collecting, information and opinions and data. So I understand that you've done a lot of work in this area, and we need to we need to kind of bring that on board to our thinking here.
Ed is next.
Thanks. Sorry, coming off mute here. Yeah, our view, in the industry is that, generally EPRs are unnecessary for larger projects. I mean, one of the key things about this whole issue is that one size doesn't fit all. So, as was mentioned, when you're talking about a rooftop solar array, that's a real different conversation than a community solar or utility scale solar type project. But the view that we have is that assessing recycling fees on manufacturers who do not ultimately bear the recycling responsibility passes increased costs onto projects, developers, utilities, and IPPs. Ultimately, this increases the cost for renewable energy to consumers by double charging for recycling a project. So in the context of the conversation around decommissioning, the view is that collecting upfront cash fees from manufacturers years or even decades before recycling would happen is inefficient. And then again, also in the context of the work that Bob Nicholson's doing at SEIA, I mean, recycling costs are falling. It is a very dynamic industry, and it is changing quite a lot year over year, if not month over month. And they're expected to continue to fall, as I mentioned before. So charging those upfront fees really ties up money, dries up prices, and really is not counter to, again, my initial point that what we have right now is a climate crisis that requires more solar, not a solar waste crisis. But we feel like the EPR approach is really a misguided one, and that we can do things around bonding, around insurance, around around decommissioning, and all those sorts of things. And that seems to be the direction in which things are going in the industry. Again, recognizing it is incredibly dynamic.
And let me just make sure I understand, like you said around bonding, around insurance. So because when we've looked at decommissioning plans, they will have a decommissioning bond, but in the plan, there's not necessarily a cost that's been set aside for recycling. Like when we look at the line item detail of how much decommissioning is going to cost, there seems to be everything but a line item for recycling. So is the idea that we would just that would you suggest that we just make sure that there's a line item in there for recycling, which, as far as I can tell, there's not today?
Yeah, Andrew, and that goes back to, again, the complexity and how things are changing. I think it depends upon what I don't know what you guys have looked at in terms of the decommissioning heretofore, but this is something that really is changing over time. I mean, utility and IPP projects are generally required to post financial resources to ensure decommissioning costs are covered. And utility and IPP projects can and do contract with recycling vendors. We actually recently penned an agreement with Solar Cycle, who's a really great example of a solar recycler, and it may make sense to get the Solar Cycle team into this discussion. Jesse and the team have been active in policy discussions nationwide, but it really does make more sense for it to be on the asset owner than on the manufacturer, in our view, given the long life, notwithstanding if it's 15 years is still longer than any appliance pretty much in general, given the long life that we're talking about and the way that the industry actually works. So I think that we will increasingly see those as line items, but it doesn't necessarily shock me that if you guys did a survey of decommissioning detail, you didn't really see it there. Again, this is something that I think you mentioned a couple of years ago, somebody wasn't even talking about it, but now they are. I think that that's really the situation industry wide. Again, in the context that right now, the waste is de minimis relative to other waste streams. It will become fairly large, although much, much smaller than municipal waste, coal ash, plastic waste, other e-waste, all the other waste streams. So again, our view is that we have time to solve this and come up with the right solution in the context of the costs going down. But that putting the EPR on the manufacturer is actually the worst possible way to go.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
I did see two hands sort of flash up, but they went down again. So I don't just want to see if anybody's okay. Daniel.
Yeah, I agree with a lot of points I've heard on EPR overall. I would just say, once again, Dan Zotos with Redwood Materials. Andrew, I think you've done a really nice job of just capturing all the different angles and avenues to approach this. Our experience thus far, in still early innings of an EV battery recycling industry, is the market dynamics are certainly there and will continue to be there as more deployment happens definitely just speaking to the battery front right now. We have been supportive of EPR frameworks overall and what they intend to do, particularly banning landfilling, making sure we are capturing this value. I think it's a really concerning aspect to just have stringent PROs attached to EPR policies specific for larger format batteries. There just doesn't really seem to be a need for that layer in order to manage these batteries appropriately. If you look at the New Jersey EV battery law that passed, there's a lot of good work thrown in there in terms of even just new definitions. There was a first in the nation definition of a specialized battery recycler that they included, really looking to align the national framework with how states are looking at this as well. And that recycler definition was really rooted in making sure folks further downstream in the value chain are at the table in terms of the actual recycling of these materials at the end of the day, and making sure that process passes a certain smell test in terms of what they're required to do, all with the idea of onshoring a ascendant and much needed domestic battery manufacturing industry here. So I think there's some really good provisions that can be had in EPR, but there's also a really square peg, round hole approach of just applying traditional EPR schema to new technologies and processes that are really unfolding and changing week by week at this point in the battery industry as well.
Okay, great. And on the PRO point that you made, I believe in New Jersey that you could elect whether to be part of a PRO or you could have your own individual stewardship plan, right? So would you agree that that's a good way about going about it, is that you can elect whether you want the PRO or the individual plan?
Yeah, so New Jersey, for example, Redwood Materials, we have inked partnership deals with much of the main automotive OEMs making electric vehicle fleet plays, looking to achieve circularity in their vehicle supply chain. Take Toyota, for example. This is a great public example of Redwood is recycling Toyota's end-of-life batteries. We also have a partnership where we will provide them cathode materials from recycled content for future production of batteries. So the industry is responding in a very meaningful way when you look at the actual value of batteries as they currently stand, but also the future process of manufacturing. What we were saying in New Jersey is the PRO entity is not necessarily needed. For example, I think they made it a voluntary PRO approach. However, in the state of New Jersey, from my understanding of that statute at this point, Redwood would not be able to work on behalf of a group of producers, but we could individually satisfy their responsibility needs, which is what we'll do. There's a battery management plan. Redwood could work directly with a producer to say, here's the process, here's what's happening, submit that with the state. That's fine, but it just seems added an unnecessary layer to then prevent a company like Redwood Materials to be able to work in aggregate with producers on this issue.
Gotcha. Okay, great. I think maybe it makes sense. So we have 20 minutes left roughly. I think it makes sense to go to the questions, just so we sort of work our way through them. Before I get to those, Sarah Harari, I just wanted to let you chime in on anything. I will keep going if you're fine, but anyone from the Green Bank who sort of wants to chime in, ask questions of some of the comments that have been made, I just wanted to give you that opportunity.
Thank you, Andrew. I'm fine to keep rolling.
Okay, perfect. Okay, great. So yeah, so the first conversation we wanted to have was about these policies at a high level, pros and cons, EPR, the AFA. Let's add decommissioning bond or some kind of financial assurance at the time of COD. Let's add that to this list. We just want to get some additional thoughts on that, which one you think is better. What I'm hearing is that it, you know, it's sort of different models for different projects and different technologies. You know, the larger projects maybe need this and the smaller projects need that, and solar needs this and batteries need that. But so that's one. We've talked about the PRO and individual stewardship plans. We also sort of have a question about like accreditation and certification requirements, and also want to understand any thoughts you have on Connecticut policy and how it should relate to other state and federal policy on the topic of recycling. Should Connecticut adopt models or terms and conditions that have been developed in other jurisdictions? So would love to hear any comments or questions that you have on these general sort of overall policy questions.
Okay, we'll start with Gabrielle and then go to Mark.
The comment that I want to make at this point is really just not to inhibit the discussion, but just to add another layer to the discussion and point out that I think that there needs to be a distinct, different discussion for residential installations for solar panels versus large commercial scale installations. And my comments earlier regarding EPR, are primarily motivated by the installation at residential locations. And for a resident to be then burdened by the end of life, I think will inhibit the installation at residential locations for solar. So I just wanted to add that as an additional layer. I think the industry can work itself out, and this is just my opinion. The industry can work itself out for larger installations. I know that in Connecticut, when we've had large installations, for example, on top of landfills, there has been a requirement for financial assurance, for ensuring that there are funds set aside for maintaining and repairing the cap of the landfill.
Mm-hmm.
And we've seen issues result from mismanagement or poor planning with respect to stormwater and its adverse impacts to the landfill cap. And so we've established mechanisms and a requirement for those financial assurance mechanisms to be established for landfill solar arrays. Since unless an array or an installation of storage batteries it isn't necessarily going to land on a solid waste facility or a hazardous waste facility, the concern becomes, what do you do with the waste at the end of life? And that's where my perspective is coming from, is how do you manage the waste at the end, at its true end of life, not calling reuse end of life, because reuse, repurposing, etc. is absolutely something that should be considered before materials get recycled or subsequently disposed of if there's no longer viability to the components. But I did want to just add that.
Thank you.
Okay,
I think,
great. Thank you.
Andrew, if I might just, even within the residential sector, we also see that there could be sort of different cases there as well. So for example, some customers might be leasing their equipment from others, and it could be that third party that may have a plan in place for recycling versus a homeowner that maybe just owns outright the equipment and would have the obligation. So I definitely take your point about like homeowners being a special case, but also even within that use case, there could be sort of different entities that might be responsible at the end of life, depending on how that individuals either, may own or not own their equipment at the end of the day.
Well, just on that point, you know, I know Posigen is on the call, and I know Sunrun. I'm not sure if someone from Sunrun is on the call or not, or any other party that does a residential lease. But does anyone want to comment on what your company philosophy is on what happens at the end of the lease? I know most people. Most of these companies expect that there would be a recontracting period for, you know, let's say 10 years. But, you know, at the end of, at the end of that, the lease between the host and the third party leaseholder, just wondering if anyone has thought about that.
I think Kyle at Posigen had to drop. Unfortunately, he.
Yeah.
So we should follow up with him on that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. We can move on.
Let's go to Mark.
Yeah, just real quick. So the model language that's being used now for the battery recycling bills, as was mentioned, it does allow for a producer to establish their own collection program, or they can join a group of together. You know, they can get together with a PRO. We think that it's important that the bills across the different states are harmonized as much as possible, because then it leads to less confusion from all levels of the supply chain, from producers to consumers to recyclers, retailers, etc. So we think that's important. Another aspect that we think is really important too is oversight. You know, any type of program, how it's run, it needs to have a check and balance. So in the case of Connecticut, it would very likely be DEEP that is the the government oversight for any of the programs. And we think that's important because, you know, you have to provide your annual reports, you have to submit your plan. DEEP has a chance to look at that, push back on certain areas they think you could do better on, and make sure that that program is staying evergreen and always, you know, moving in the right direction.
Okay. That all makes sense. Thank you.
Andrew, just in the interest of time, I'm wondering if we should review the next two slides with the discussion questions, and then
Sure.
we'll have the Slido, but I think it makes sense just to keep getting the questions. But then I'll just remind everybody that we're going to keep the Slido open afterwards. So if we don't get to everybody's comments or questions in the session, you can follow up that route. And also just a reminder that we'll have the survey questions in the Slido as well.
And Sarah, one other question that I'd love to put into the Slido would just be, what do people think the average life of a solar panel is going to be, and the average life of a battery? I know we've had a lot of discussion on solar panels. I think there may even be more argument on the average life of a battery before recycling. So, okay. So so we're really just taking some of these issues that I went over in the slides earlier and just consolidating them here. But you know, at decommissioning, what should be required in the decommissioning plan? Should there be, you know, a U.S. recycler that's specified, or, you know, any recycler that's specified? Should the T-clip test be required by the OEM? And then in terms of the collection, you know, what is optimal for collecting panels or batteries from smaller projects? And as Sarah mentioned, you know, maybe there's a nuance between, you know, a PPA and host-owned systems. Transportation to the recycling facility, this issue of the transfer-based exclusion, which exempts the transfer from a hazardous waste classification. And are there approaches Connecticut can take to reduce transportation costs, which are, you know, typically a very a large part of the overall cost of recycling? And then finally, go to the next page. Just have questions about, should recycling companies and facilities be certified and audited? What should the definitions be for acceptable recycling methods? What should penalties be for non-conformance? And in terms of remanufacturing, can Connecticut help in ensuring that manufacturers get credit for the domestic content? And also this issue of the OEM maybe being part of a recycling program, but then the OEM no longer being around 20 years down the line. Is there financial assurance that's sufficient to handle the recycling? Is that something that is addressed in other policies in other jurisdictions? So those are the questions overall that we had. Okay, how can we balance the manufacturer narratives to extend out and pretend the problem is small versus recyclers pushing for dollars in the yeah, okay. In the SCH for end of life today, not sure what SCH is. But yeah, I see the two sides here. I see the two sides. There's some parties who sort of are interested in assuming a longer life, and some parties that are interested in assuming a shorter life. And it's yeah, go ahead.
Hey, Andrew, it's Sarah. I do wonder, listening to today's conversation, if it suggests a divergence in approach between solar and storage, where, as we heard earlier, storage has valuable minerals that perhaps might motivate a private market to spring up to reclaim those materials, versus solar, which, while there is value there, it's perhaps insufficient to create an industry that would service rooftop solar panels in residential communities. I think it's something worth considering based on what we've heard today.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Okay, I guess I can stop sharing the screen at this point, and maybe just turn it back to the group if there's any comments as we wrap up in the next 5 minutes.
I would just echo comments from earlier in terms of, obviously all of this is super well intentioned. I think it's great to have so many people across various industries at the table talking about this early on as well. So just happy to see that happening in such a meaningful way.
Yeah, 100% agree. It's critical. I mean, it's nice to see, actually.
Apologies if I missed this. When do you want survey responses?
Ideally, as soon as possible.
Yeah,
but
fair. Yes.
I mean, I think within a week, even 2 weeks, to be honest, would be sufficient.
I heard a week. So, I'll do that.
Thank you.
And I just to reiterate what was just said, you have the right questions. It's really nice to be having this conversation, not reactively. So thank you.
Yeah, no, this is the second of 5 meetings, and so we have tremendous brain trust here, and so I think we're going to get closer and closer to what we want out of this, which is some recommendations that make sense for Connecticut. And so we really appreciate everyone's input on this. So Sarah, maybe we can wrap it up there. I know we're pretty much at the bottom of the hour here. But yeah, feel free to get back to us on the Slido. Also, if you want to contact us directly, all the materials will be on the website that we've shared, and my contact information, but all of our contact information of me and my colleagues at Power Advisory are available. So feel free to reach out, and we'll look forward to coming back together about a month from now.
Yeah, thanks everybody. Really constructive input. So appreciate the time, and I think it was a really great working group session.
Thanks for putting it together.
Yeah, likewise.
Thank you.
Yeah, Sarah Harari, any closing remarks? Or are we good to go?
Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. Sarah, I wonder if in the follow-up to this meeting, we can just send around the link to that survey again, so folks that weren't able to join us today can fill it out too.
For sure.
Awesome.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks
Have a good
again.
evening.
Have a good day.
Bye.